You'd think the engines that burn oil are the worn-out ones, the abused ones, the ones that lived a hard life on skip changes and bargain bin filters, and it is wrong. Some engines start using oil while the compression still looks decent, the power still feels normal, and the owner swears it was maintained. Meanwhile, another engine with twice the miles barely moves the dipstick between changes. So what gives? Why does one engine sip oil and another drink it like rent is due? Here's the ugly truth. Oil burning is usually not one failure. It's a stack up. Design choice here, a heat problem there, a stuck ring, a lazy PCV system, a seal that got hard. And the owner tries the oldest trick in the book, just pour in thicker oil, and sometimes the bill gets worse. That's where the money starts leaking out, not only through the tailpipe, but through bad guesses. Because oil consumption turns people into gamblers. They start buying fixes, jumping viscosity grades, stretching top-offs, and telling themselves a quart every 1,000 miles is cheaper than a repair. For a while, maybe. Then deposits build, the ring pack gets sticky, and what began as a nuisance becomes a wear problem. The cheap move becomes the expensive move. That is the whole game here. Total cost of ownership versus the illusion of savings. Start with the place most people never see, the ring pack. Those thin bands around the piston are doing 3 jobs at once. They have to seal combustion pressure, scrape oil back down the wall, and survive a brutal sliding life where the oil film can go from healthy to paper thin in an instant. That is where tribology stops sounding academic and starts emptying wallets. If the film gets too thin, you get boundary contact. That means scuffing instead of gliding. Asperity's kiss. Micro-welding starts. Dual surface fatigue follows. Now the ring no longer controls oil cleanly, and combustion gases slip past it as blow-by. Once that happens, oil starts traveling where it should never go, up into the chamber and out through the exhaust. Modern engines make that balancing act harder than many people realize. Engineers chase fuel economy by trimming friction wherever they can, and piston ring design lives right in that trade-off. Lower tension helps efficiency. Less drag means a tiny gain in fuel burn. But ring pack research has long shown there's a trade-off between reducing friction and increasing oil consumption, because the same ring system that cuts drag can also become less forgiving about deposits, bore finish, and operating abuse. Lake Speed Jr. has hammered this point too. Changes that lower friction can also hinder oil control, especially once wear and deposits enter the picture. Then it clicks. The engine may not be worn out first. It may be deposit sensitive first. Burnt oil and oxidation byproducts can pack into the ring grooves like carbon mortar. The ring still looks present. It still exists. But it stops floating and flexing the way it should. That is carbon jacking. The ring gets restricted in its groove, blow-by rises, oil control worsens, and the cycle feeds itself. The more oil it burns, the more deposits it makes. The more deposits it makes, the more oil it burns. You don't notice it in one dramatic afternoon. You notice it 6 months later when the dipstick suddenly has a pattern and the exhaust tip starts telling on you. Now add the second leak path, the valve train. A lot of people hear burning oil and think rings only, not even close. Oil can also get pulled down past valve guides and valve stem seals, especially on decel when manifold vacuum is high. The cool part is that valve stem seals are supposed to meter oil, not block it completely. Too little oil and the valve guide can scuff. Too much and the engine burns it, coats the valve, and starts laying down deposits that rob power slowly enough to stay sneaky. That is why a worn valve seal engine can still have decent compression and still use oil like crazy. It's a different path to the same smoke. Then there's the PCV system, the part almost nobody blames until after they've blamed everything else. Positive crankcase ventilation is supposed to pull pressure and fumes out of the crankcase. But it also has to deal with oil mist. If the baffling is poor, if the valve is stuck, or if the flow pattern is just lousy for that engine family, the intake can start drinking suspended oil vapor, not puddles. Mist. That matters because mist is easy to ignore and hard to diagnose. The owner sees consumption and assumes ring failure, when the engine is really feeding itself oil through its own breathing system. Fixing a bad PCV path can be the cheapest quart-saving repair on the vehicle, which is why skipping it is such a costly mistake. And here's the myth that refuses to die. Thicker oil always fixes burning. Simple, right? Wrong. Higher viscosity can reduce some leakage, sure, but it can also create new problems. Stull notes that a thicker oil does not automatically reduce oil consumption and can actually increase how much oil reaches the chamber over time. It may bump up oil pressure and make a dashboard warning disappear. But that is not the same as restoring ring control. Think of it like switching from water to honey when the real problem is a clogged drain and a bent squeegee. You changed the fluid, you did not fix the path. In some older, loose clearance engines, one step thicker can buy time. In other engines, it is just a slower route to more deposits and frustration. This is where oil chemistry stops being marketing copy and becomes survival math. The hot ring zone is a furnace. Detergents and dispersants are the cleaning crew. Oxidation inhibitors are the bodyguards. But even a good additive package has limits. If oxidation runs away, varnish forms. If the ring grooves load up, rings stop moving right. If volatility is high, the lighter fractions of the oil leave first under heat. That evaporation piece matters more than people think. The NOAC test exists to estimate how much oil is likely to evaporate under severe heat, and lower volatility generally means less oil loss to evaporation. But even that is not a crystal ball. As Lake Speed Jr. points out, lab volatility tests are models, not perfect replicas of what happens in a real engine with real hot spots and contamination. That lab versus street gap is where a lot of owners get fooled. In a controlled sequence IBB-ware test, the engine runs a repeatable 200-hour cycle, 24,000 times on a known pattern at controlled conditions. It tells you whether an oil can protect against valve train wear in a standardized environment. But your daily life is not a standardized environment. Your life is cold starts, short hops, stoplights, idling in August, then a 10-minute blast onto the freeway, then back to crawling through Chicago with fuel washing the cylinders on every short-run restart. Blackstone has shown how repeated starts can push fuel dilution up even when an engine still reaches full temperature. And both Blackstone and Speed Diagnostics lean on oil analysis for exactly this reason. The used oil tells you what your actual engine saw, not what a test stand predicted. Why does that matter for oil burning? Because fuel dilution thins the oil. Thin oil loses some load-carrying strength. The protective film gets weaker. Now the ring pack is more likely to enter the kind of contact that leads to scuffing and wear, while contamination can also distort what you think you know from the dipstick alone. Short trip operation makes this worse because the engine may not stay hot long enough to purge the fuel and moisture out of the oil. So the owner sees consumption and thinks, I need thicker oil. Sometimes the smarter answer is, I need fewer short trips, shorter interval, PCV check, and maybe an oil analysis before I turn a maintenance issue into a mechanical one. Tell me your mileage, the oil grade you run, and whether the level drops faster after highway pulls or after a week of short trips. That detail matters more than brand loyalty ever will. And if you've got a turbo or direct injection, tell me whether you've smelled raw fuel on the dipstick or seen that milkshake under the oil cap yet. Those clues are not trivia. They're the map. There's another trap here. Assuming every oil-burning engine needs hard parts right now. Not always. If the issue is seal hardness, a well-chosen high-mileage oil can help because seal conditioners are meant to restore some pliability to aged seals. That is not magic. It won't fix a broken ringland or a valve guide that's already pounded out. But it can shift the economics in your favor when seepage and mild oil use come from old elastomers, not major wear. Same goes for interval discipline. A decent oil change before it is cooked into varnish will often beat a fancy oil left in too long. So why do some engines burn oil and others don't? Because oil control is a system, not a single part. It's ring tension, groove cleanliness, cylinder finish, seal condition, volatility, PCV design, heat load, driving pattern, and maintenance timing all stacked on top of each other. One engine gets a forgiving combination and lives an easy life. Another gets a tighter efficiency target, more deposit sensitivity, more short trip abuse, and a driver who mistakes top-offs for maintenance. Same mileage, different fate. The verdict is blunt. Engines burn oil when the machine loses control of where oil goes, and that loss of control usually starts long before the engine feels bad. The winning move is not blind faith in thicker oil or miracle additives, it is diagnosis. Check the PCV path. Watch consumption by miles, not vibes. Use the viscosity the engine actually wants unless you have a reason to deviate. Shorten the interval when fuel dilution and heat demand it. Sample the oil if the pattern looks odd, because once oil starts getting past the rings, past the seals, or through the breather, it is no longer a lubricant. It is a bill. And here's the lingering thought that should bother you a little. Even after you get oil consumption under control, the story may not be over, because the same crankcase vapors